Hey folks, Martin Popoff here for another episode of The Contrarians, but this is one of those episodes that we call feedback on your feedback. We always love reading the comments, what you say about these episodes where, the concept of the show is that one of the three of us, myself or Marco or Nick, or Graham actually, we believe that a certain album by a band is their greatest album. And I'm a big UFO fan. I did a UFO book for Brian Slagle and Metal Blade Records back in 2005. That is now two separate books. One's called Lights Out UFO Surviving the 70s with UFO, and the other one's called Letting Go UFO in the 80s and 90s. So I'm a big fan from way back. But for this very early episode of The Contrarians, I raved up and down that No Place to Run was the greatest UFO album of all time, right? So this is one of the older episodes we haven't done a feedback on your feedback episode on, but let's take care of that now. So Mighty Decibel writes in and says, by the way, you can't use stats to determine the best album of a band. Otherwise, Paranoid would be Sabbath's best album. Very interesting point. I mean, we use stats to determine certain things with these episodes. We like looking at how many songs were played live, etc. That Paranoid thing, boy, that is a whole debate in itself. This idea of when we get really sick of albums, do they go down our list? It's a hard thing to grapple with, but yeah, I thought that was an interesting point to bring up. Letting Go is one of my favorite UFO songs. This is AZDH85224. Our band used to play it. Loved Schenker, but Paul Chapman played great guitar for UFO. Great job, guys. Thank you very much. Tom Wallace says, I've always thought that my appreciation for No Place to Run, holding it in nearly as high esteem as Lights Out, Obsession, and No Heavy Petting. Great choices there. I kind of put No Heavy Petting pretty high up my list. Was maybe a bit of a guilty pleasure. Such a statement could be controversial among UFO fans. Absolutely. We ran into a lot of that with this. There's a lot of people who are steadfast saying that it's got to be a Schenker album, right? But I must admit, it's a very consistently good album. I was not super offended by the departure of Michael Schenker. Absolutely not. Me neither, because I love Wild, Willing, and the Innocent. Mechanics was a little bit of a downer when it first came up, but I've grown to love it over the years. Let's see. I really used my brain, and despite what some list says, I take this album over Lights Out, though Electric Phase is unbeatable. This is Bluerfoot saying this to the guy in the right. Critics and lists often don't stand the test of time. Well, that's kind of the way we've set up the show, where we have one guy refuting. It's sort of the idea. John Rosier says, sometimes I want to hear Schenker stuff and other times I want to hear Chapman stuff. I agree with Martin that this album was huge. Probably the best album cover UFO had too. Pretty interesting. UFO had some really good album covers, but yeah, this is just a shot of the band standing in front of a gas station at night. And I thought it looked really cool. It's a great looking band shot. Let's see. Bluerfoot also says, love this album. Really love the three songs referenced. This Fire Burns Tonight, Any Day, and Gone in the Night. Absolutely. That was one of the reasons I was raving about this album, that there are these dark horse songs on here, these mellower tunes that I thought sounded really, really good and really gave it some extra. It's funny. I was walking around the other day listening to the Cheap Trick album that George Martin produced, All Shook Up, All Shook Down. I can never remember, because there's a Replacements one that's also the same thing, All Shook Down. I think Cheap Tricks is All Shook Up. But it's funny. George Martin, I don't think really particularly changed that band. I don't think he particularly changed UFO. This was a good sounding album. Let's see. Classic Rock Station says Walk on Water, Self-Made Man is terrific. That is the late period UFO album that a lot of people talk about as a really good one. That was like the much lauded reunion album with Michael, 1995. Good album. Really cool. Buddy of mine, Bob Nalbandian, really loves that album a lot. Thomas Demont says, another great Contrarian segment. I agree with Martin, whereas Force It is my favorite Schenker era release, but I love UFO's Paul Chapman years. And for all the points that Martin brought up, No Place to Run is a great release, start to finish. Thanks, guys. You cheered me up during these crazy times we're currently going through. Let's see. Pretzel Rides says, agreed. The three Paul Chapman albums were pure magic, as well as the U.S. tours during this time frame. he means Mog. Mog's writing was deep, earthy, and about real life. That's really cool. Like great lyrics, right? Paul saved the band many times when Schenker quit sulking many times. Yeah, exactly. So Paul had to come in, and fix things sometimes. Obviously, Tonka is dearly missed. When we did this episode, he was still alive at that point, but we have lost him, and we've lost Pete Way as well. Let's see. Low Care 54 says High Stakes and Dangerous Men is a very good UFO album with Lawrence Archer on guitar. I tend to disagree on that. I don't think it's a very good album. Let's see. Just found your channel and subscribed. Thank you very much. Classic Guitar Rock again. Awesome. Looking forward to more. Love Martin, but I have to respectfully disagree. And he goes on and on. It's a pretty good. I don't want to read it because I don't want to click on the thing. I've got to keep this simple here. Love the show. Let's see. Dig Mac Diggity Doo says, I agree with Martin. No Place to Run is my favorite UFO album. Well, thank you. The biggest problem with UFO was Chrysalis. They were not very good in promoting the band. Sad part is Paul Raymond. Yes, we lost Paul as well. Paul Chapman and Pete Way have passed away, leaving only Andy and Phil from this lineup. Wow, that's true. It hasn't really sunk in that that's the case. Also agree with Martin on the Vinnie Moore stuff. Not my favorite. Have you listened to Mog's Sign of 4 release? Yes, I have. Don't like it very much. As I might have mentioned in this episode, love the Chocolate Box album. I think that's one of the great unsung UFO, but not in name albums. Danny Joe Brown, good album, no doubt. I prefer Wild, Willing, and Innocent. It's the best Tonka Years album, but No Place to Run is still very worthy. I've always felt Mog is one of the most underrated singers ever. I would love to hear him do an album of standards, just crooning his ass off. Not me, because I don't like when bands do covers. I don't want to hear them do classics. I just want to hear them write more great UFO stories about Johnny and whoever else, right? Let's see. Avery Teplitsky says, great pick. And despite both the band's and George Martin's somewhat subsequent muted feelings about this album, it's one of my favorites. And George Martin's patented production techniques were undoubtedly a great boon to this stellar collection of both hard rocking and more subtle, lighter tracks. And undoubtedly, Youngblood is in my top 3 all-time favorite UFO tracks. Totally agree. What a great song. I mean, there's every single direction they address on this record is done beautifully. Even the hard-hitting blues of Mystery Train, right? Really cool. Great metal on it, but great mellow stuff on it as well. William Von Shanks says, people don't talk about it so much, but there was a new wave punk element underlying UFO. Pete Way's solo record was pure punk. True. I mean, Pete was a little bit of a punker, but in 79, 80, when this was conceived, the Skinny Ties were a presence, and the bass and drums on the forefront fit this influence much like the Cars would merge a classic rock sensibility with new wave. Wow. Well, that's interesting. He goes on, and again, I don't want to hit the read more here. We're just going through a few of these at the top here. Savarich says, solid arguments. No Place to Run is pound for pound the best Chapman effort. For me, Lights Out is still the UFO standard. Haha, light standard. Get it? I would consider Walk on Water my Contrarian album. Yeah, it's a good choice, but it is incomplete. 8 tracks with 2 unnecessary covers. It's true. It's a little bit thin. It's not that substantial a record. That's kind of the problem with it. Let's see. Woot Woot says, I'm with you, Martin. To me, the Chapman era is songwriting-wise superior to the Schenker era. No Place to Run is a classic all the way through. I'm glad you mentioned This Fire Burns Tonight, which I wouldn't consider a ballad at all. True. A cool, moody rocker that is Wild, Willing, and Innocent, follow-up to No Place to Run. Equally good. Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, basically all those albums were really good, until Paul Chapman was gone. Bit of a fall down, I suppose, on Making Contact, even though it is quite heavy and is a lot of thought is put into the production, like it's a very smooth stadium rocking album. But I think the first 2 are the ones that have the most charm there. So thanks for the feedback. That was really cool. It's nice thinking of these again, because like I say, I haven't this episode is one of the oldest ones we haven't done a feedback episode. So please leave some more comments for us. Keep the debate going on these UFO records. I've always loved this debate between the Schenker years and the Paul Chapman years. The Paul Chapman years is where that little bit of Teutonic they had kind of goes away, right? Don't know what it gets replaced with. Maybe it gets replaced with better, more memorable songs. but it is a little bit like the Uli John Roth into the Matthews Jab era too, right? It's kind of a similar sort of feel that you get. It goes a little less continental to something a little more British and American, perhaps. So there you go. That's our UFO feedback on feedback. Thanks always for subscribing. This is really cool. We're growing this channel. It's a lot of fun for us, and we would love to see the numbers keep going up. So thanks very much. Talk to you soon.